Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to HeartBeat.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to HeartBeat, to our new time on Wednesday evenings. We're so happy that you are joining us this evening. I'm also happy to be back. It's been close to 3 months since I've been on air, and I'm excited that I am back. I had quite a last few months dealing with health, some pretty significant health, but I'm better. God is good and has me back here tonight. Being sick the last few months, I'll be talking more about it in the shows to come. In fact, I have a couple things. I have a whole appreciation now from a different perspective as a patient to see our healthcare system. And oh my goodness, so much to talk about with that. But I'll do more about that in some of the coming shows because I'm actually going to be doing a show on Black women's health. I have a show scheduled for March the 10th, I believe it is, where we have Senator Patty Cooter is coming on because she is running for the insurance commissioner job here in Washington State. And it's a great time, since we have a change in leadership, to start addressing some of the issues in our healthcare system. We'll be talking quite a bit about it's everything. It's the insurance companies. It is how to navigate that system, or is that system even navigatable? It's what I observed with nurses and doctors and just how all of that works. So I can't wait to dig into that topic more because, again, like I have now a firsthand experience that I'll share more with you. But I'm back here today and I'm just grateful. By the grace of God, I am sitting here, and I absolutely mean that. You know, during my absence, there didn't even seem to be a break on, all these issues that I care about, the whole issues with Black women and these whole attacks on Black women. And you're going to hear a lot on tonight's show. We have a lot packed into the show tonight. One of the most recent events that just has me stirred up, it helped propel me to go, I got to get back on air and start talking about these issues. Is the Fani Willis issue. Last week, I was mesmerized and glued to the TV, watching everything that was unfolding with that. And it was so familiar to me. It's familiar to most of us as Black women, the attacks, the characterization of what they were doing with her. And I got to tell you, when she walked into the courtroom, I think everybody gasped. I started crying because I myself, if you read my book, that is everything that went on with her in trial could almost be verbatim of chapter 1 in my book about what I was put through. The way that we as women in general, but more particularly with Black women, we are just scrutinized so heavy and constantly nitpicked apart. And even when there's nothing there to, if it's not even connected to performance, even though organizations do everything in their power to try to make this all a performance issue with folks, but they come after, your personal life. They come after, sex life, money, the fact that you keep money in the house, the fact that we have different cultural norms and they're questioned and they're talked about the way that they are, even the commentators. This is a thing about not having diverse organizations or diversity in people even talking about it, because many of the normal media were talking about, they just didn't understand why a father, like who would be paying cash, like why do we do those things. And if you heard her dad have to break it down for the young judge who was listening, he was having to educate somebody who's in a decision making position, which you could argue anyone who's in any leadership position, any white people who are in leadership positions should have cultural competency and be able to understand that the kind of things that are being talked about, or the things that she's saying, Fani was saying on the stand, are not unusual. They're just unusual to you because you haven't taken the time to progress or learn about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. You don't know enough about that topic, or clearly haven't brought that into your own world so that you would have an understanding, because if you did, it wouldn't even be a topic of discussion. Now, a lot of these issues that are talked about, they're just so unfair. What we have to constantly defend ourselves and constantly have to educate everyone around us. It's fatiguing. We shouldn't have to do that. And yet we do. And so in every facet of our life, look, I'm watching. You're going to get to hear, before I jump into the guests that we have on with us tonight, you're going to get to hear some other firsthand experience that our co-host Erin Jones and two friends of hers she brought on, what they experienced. And I'm not going to put words in their mouth. I'm going to let them talk to you themselves about what they all went through. But the reason why I'm continuing on with HeartBeat and continuing on with bringing our elected officials, like we have to do something about accountability and change. And it's interesting. I'll just say, most of we talk a lot about politics on this show. We bring a lot of elected officials, and we'll be bringing people who are putting their name in the hat to run for office. We'll be bringing them on here in the April-May timeline so that we can start to see the type of folks that are trying to run for office. If you were paying attention to this past week, maybe it's just for junkies like me who follow a lot of these things to the T, but we had confirmation hearings in the state of Washington, and noticeably what wasn't on that confirmation was the Office of Equity that was in existence and built by one of our co-hosts, Dr. Karen Johnson. It was just noticeably not there. And so we got to start to ask the questions like, why? What's happening where in the state that we said we're going to be the first across the country, and then we have, a woman, people have heard me say this before, these organizations hire headhunters to hunt for the talent. So first they hunt for us and then they hunt us down once we get into these seats. And so what's happening here in the state of Washington around equity now? Like, it's just interesting to me that confirmation didn't occur. And so we got to start paying closer attention to why. We have to start holding these leaders accountable for, if it's not advancing, why is it not? Is somebody coming after it? Are other women trying to take, one of the topics we're going to talk about here really soon is going to be about the demise and takedown of Black women by other Black women. That's a common practice that we're going to start unpacking here pretty soon is one of our topics. But I'm paying attention, and I'm paying attention to our Black elected officials. What's happening with them? Are they progressing any of the issues that we are in need of around equitable practices and equitable systems? So I'll be watching that closely about all of that. So I just wanted to kind of reframe all of this up again, because, there isn't a day that goes by that something is not happening on this topic. Now, I wanted to do this show. I wanted to give this whole DEI, the takedown, the fight against it, as a great topic to talk about before we bring in the guests that we have on. Let me bring in our co-hosts because I want to hear their reactions to my opening comments. So let's welcome in Dr. Karen Johnson. Hey, Dr. J. Let's bring in Erin Jones. And let's bring in Stefani Coverson, our future Dr. Coverson. Let's get her in. There she is. Hi. How are you all? I missed you all in my time off. I just want to thank you. These are true sisters who stayed with me. Thank you for everything y'all did while I was out for me. So much I can say. I just don't want to cry on the show tonight because I will. But I love y'all. I want to hear what's been going on in your mind and heart since we haven't been on air, and some of my opening comments. Like, what are some of your reactions to today's headlines and what's going on?
I'll go last since my guests are coming on later.
Okay.
I'll go last.
Okay. Dr. Coverson, how are you? Let's hear from you.
I'm doing well. And I'm just glad to be in community and company with you. So this is just a very meaningful episode. I'm tired.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would love to see I don't know, like a third or fourth edition of the playbook. Watching the way that Fonnie Willis was treated, and the invasive questions and foolishness that ensued was interesting, to put it kindly. And also just the audacity that some of the people filing those complaints are in romantic entanglements with other attorneys on that side of the aisle. So, as Black women, we're just held to, different standards, similar to Dr. Gay's bully, and his wife, who plagiarized Wikipedia, apparently, as the allegations go. But just that the rules just seem to apply to us, if there are even rules, right? So that's sort of the other question. So I feel like it's just been a rough several months in the media with all that has happened to and what Black women have been subjected to in these very front-facing media spotlight positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. Yes. Dr. J, how are you doing?
I'm delighted to see you all this evening and to be with you. And I've had a good 3 months now of sleep and rest.
Amen.
Just restoring my soul, renewing my joy, and I've had a great time starting writing my book. And speaking truth to power in these interviews I've had a chance to attend. And so when I think about your opening remarks, I'm like, wow, Dr. Stefani Coverson taught me a word last year, misogynoir.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked that up in light of tonight. And here's the definition: dislike of, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against Black women. And I've just been thinking about what Grandma Alice said. She said, God don't make no junk. And I've been sitting with the fact that you don't have dislike of or contempt for based on something or someone you don't even know, unless you're threatened by their power, their brilliance, their excellence, their creativity, their love, their essence, just the way they show up. And I'm particularly pleased, Cindy, that you are here and you're a model of that, an example of that, in light of all that you have gone through over the last 3 months. And yet, still you rise.
Still,
And
I rise.
Dr. Coverson and what she's had to navigate in the pursuit of her PhD. And still, Stephanie, you rise. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say, Erin, about what you just walked through, and still you rise. Because when I read that a billionaire withdrew his funding to Harvard because, quote, DEI isn't working, I just had to go back to bed. I didn't even know what that meant. What's not working? Diversity, any difference whatsoever. So are we not important? Equity, making sure people have what they need to succeed. Is that not important? Inclusion, now mind you, I'm not down with inclusion in a racist oppressive system, but let's just pretend it's inclusion in decision making. Is that not working? What is not working? So I can't wait to hear what you have to say, Erin, what your guests have to say about your encounter on the Dr. Phil show.
Oh, we're not naming the show.
Oh,
We're not
I'm
supposed
sorry.
It's okay. It won't be hard, to figure out. I mean, I'm sorry. I did put it in the notes earlier and then or in the promo and I took it out. So I apologize for that.
But tell the truth. Like, tell the truth and
here's the
shame
thing.
the devil.
We have to be careful, though. The three of us have to be careful. So I just want to share that until the show comes out, we have to be careful because we did sign some paperwork. But I want to offer. I want to offer that this is bigger than the show, though, and that's why I think this conversation is really important. Because what I was telling some administrators today in a school district that had me come do 2 hours of training for administrators on equity is this show allowed me behind the curtain. It's like the Wizard of Oz. I got to see behind the curtain of a much bigger thing. So I think what the ladies and I are going to talk about is there's the show, but there's the bigger message behind the show that we got to see and experience. And that's what the conversation needs to be, is this is bigger than any one show. Because that show, in the bigger scheme of things, is just a little, he's not on a big channel. But the messages are coming from some pretty powerful voices that I think we need to interrogate and push against and be ready for when they come.
Yeah, it's a microcosm. It's absolutely a microcosm of the larger society. I think my overall point is that we are, it feels like at times, when this dirtiness and underhandedness is playing out, I think that we're, expected to go high, take the higher ground, not speak on things, while that churn continues to happen in the background. And even though, this bigger picture, more, powerful people, etc., I think the silence is part of the problem. And so just the interrogation of this behavior, right?
Yeah.
And I think about, some of these large named people who got their start and their toehold, into the stratosphere, on the shoulders of the beneficiaries of affirmative action, the beneficiaries of, the hard blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors and other communities of color and their ancestors. I just find it reprehensible. I really do. So I'll leave it there.
No, that's real.
And the narrative around DEI isn't working. It's interesting because on one level, they're right. It's not, because of the resistance to progressing folks. And when we are progressed, how many times have we talked about on this show, how many times I've written about it, I've spoken about it. The life cycle of a Black woman is 2 years. So even when the churn of, making progress is not, the net, our guests are both HR people. I don't know if they know I'm a former HR executive too. So the net hire ratios, they're both, we'll get them on here in just a second. They're both in the talent acquisition, talent management space, which is about not only recruiting and getting talent in the door, but developing and helping to nurture the talent. But if your net hire ratios, if you're churning people faster than you can hire them, then of course it's not working. Of course it's not going to be progressed. And so the numbers don't tell the story, because the real numbers we should be paying attention to are the managers that are making the churn. How many times look at people of color in their department versus the churn of them moving out? Like the managers who are not able to hold on to the talent, the managers, like the problem is the middle management. I've said it and written about it. It is not that talent isn't there. Erin, I'm going to turn to you because I'm going to introduce in Ashley and Rachel. I have both of their bios. I just gave a hint at their backgrounds. I can let you talk more about both your guests and how you met them at this national event. And let's bring them in and let's all of us talk about what's going on here. All right.
So, yeah, I am so excited that my two new friends, out of a really tough situation, it was not a fun experience, but out of a really tough experience, I have gotten to connect with two women who are in this work for all the right reasons. And I have told them many times now, and we've told each other that, and the best part of this trip was that we are now connected to one another. And so I think the best way to introduce this is, Ashley, maybe you start, but talk about how did you get into DEI work? Because I think that context is really important. And I want to offer too that one of the things that I love about my sisters here is that we all see incredible value in working in partnership with non-Black folks. Mm-hmm. And all of us have demonstrated a real commitment to doing this work in partnership. And so I think what you get to see on the screen is how we believe this work needs to be done. So I'm just honored to share space with Rachel and Ashley and to have met you two. You're just such an incredible addition to my life and my journey. But Ashley, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into DEI work?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for the introduction, ladies. And thanks for letting us be here, by the way, and extending the table to us, because I am grateful for that. How I got into DEI is actually really rather interesting. I was somewhat of a social equity opponent. I was born and raised below the Mason-Dixon on the south side of Texas. I am an Abeka book curriculum survivor, and I just went into college with all sorts of mixed knowledge, thinking that I knew everything because I was told it was all capital T truth. Went through a lot of unlearning. I started doing research in traditional gender studies. That's what it was called back then. And then I quickly moved into what's considered anti-Blackness studies and really, really got to learn so much more than I ever could have fathomed. And so with that, I went to be a professor, loved educating people, but it was something that only paid in popsicle sticks and bubblegum. So I had to do something a little bit better than that. So I went into the corporate world. I fell in love with talent acquisition and it loved me back. I was able to work my way up in a Fortune 500 org. I had worked in staffing. I was the head of talent for a virtual conferencing platform during 2020. So it was, perfect time. And we created some beautiful case studies to where now I have actually taken all of the research and the work that I have practiced within the talent space and created a company called DEI Labs. And we actually teach people the recipes that I created and that we've tested and that we have use cases for. So sorry to to talk so long. I don't know how long that was, but it felt really long. Okay, Rachel, your turn.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Ashley, and also thank you all for having me. I think I'm a little unique here that I don't come to you all, or I didn't go on to the show trying to proclaim to be an expert, because I'm not. I'm just, my entire career has been in talent acquisition. I've been doing it for 25 years. And in the role, in the position that I have had the privilege to be in, we become the gatekeepers of the organization. And if your recruiting team is not educated, trained, and bought in to creating equitable hiring practices and recruiting for a broad range of skill sets and diversity, you're going to have a really hard time in your organization. So I feel as a recruiter, we have just a tremendous amount of responsibility to be educated and to be influencers within the organization, which is not always easy. I think, Cindi, you mentioned about kind of middle management, and a lot of the DEI work in organizations falls on the shoulders of recruiters, and that's not necessarily where it belongs, because we can bring in people into an organization, but we can't keep them, and we can't foster a culture that and an infrastructure that supports diversity. That has to come from everybody, and in particular, the leadership of an organization. So I've become very passionate about this, but I want to be very clear that I don't feel like I'm an expert in any way.
Mm-hmm. I want to hear about what went down in that smaller market TV show that you were mentioning. Before we go there, I just wanted to echo what you just said, Rachel, about the recruiters, or the first face in an organization, and you used the term gatekeepers, which is spot on. I'm throwing out that in my career, I feel like I've worked in Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 company, and I feel like 70% of talent was lost at the recruiter stage, because buying into it, or I think is the word you use, but the subtleties of what goes on there, from my perspective, is an atrocity. It's where the problem begins. I have a whole different mindset or thought process about how that should be addressed, but I don't want to take away from, I want to make sure we talk about what went down in the lower TV market.
And I just add one thought, though, because in terms of recruiters, again, one of the things that most recruiters are incentivized on and rewarded for and evaluated on is time to fill. And so how quickly can we fill this job? Well, we can fill it so quickly if we hire Bob's referral, who's another white dude. So I think that's part of the problem as well, is that recruiters are incentivized for some of the wrong things.
So I think, Cindi, what I want to invite us to is a conversation, because this is something that Ashley and Rachel and I have talked about a ton in the last couple of weeks. Some of the terms that get thrown out by the other side, and just so that the viewers can understand, here are some of the attacks that are coming from the other side. So number one, I'm going to say misogynoir. I'm glad, Dr. J, that you brought that up, because we are set up against two Black men. So just, that's all I'm going to say, details. But I made it really clear in the opening scene when I came out on stage, I'm not going to play this game. Like, I'm not going to let this. And for the Christian folks who are watching, I think all but Rachel identify as Jesus followers. And one of the people was a Black Christian person, a male. And I said to him, looked him in the eyes, and I said, understand, I'm also a Jesus girl. And my husband was a pastor for 20 years. And so I also want to share with my Christian brothers and sisters, part of the reason that the four regulars on the show do this work is because of our faith experience. And I am not ashamed to say that for me, this is ministry. It's not just some intellectual pursuit. Unlike Dr. Stefani and Dr. J, I didn't go get a PhD in this. This is a life pursuit that I know I was called to. And so this is ministry for me. But it is often framed, not just in our experience together, but it's often framed as anti-Christian, this conversation today. And so I want to invite my Christian friends who are watching, because I reached out to my Christian friends and said, I want you to watch. For my Christian friends, I absolutely believe this is our work. This is our ministry of reconciliation. But the word reconciliation requires that you reconcile, that you actually have a relationship. And so my invitation to the Christian people that are listening, if you don't have any relationship with us, there's nothing to reconcile. So you have to first start with relationship with us. And that's the work for you. So as you listen tonight, I want you to hear that in your head, like, who do you have relationship with right now and who don't you have relationship with? And until you actually have relationship with us, I don't think you get to judge this work. You can't have reconciliation without actually first having relationship. So, but ladies, what were some of the terms that got thrown out a ton on the show? And Ashley, I'm gonna call on you, just being a teacher, I'm gonna call on you, because there was a term that just kept getting thrown around, that I hear thrown around in this work all the time, that you asked for a definition of, but I want, we all know, all three of us ladies know exactly which word this is. But Ashley, can you talk about the word?
Oh yeah, the good word. Let me share it with you all, ladies, today. But it is meritocracy. And yes.
Ooh.
Yeah. Ooh. It gets me that hot and heavy too, you know. And so whenever I saw it all tossed about and being used rather recklessly, I honestly do not remember what I said really at all to this day. I think we're all going to find out together on the thing. Like, oh, snap, that came out of her mouth. Who knew? But my first question to the individual on that lower market television after that individual was throwing around the term meritocracy was, how is that defined? Because on the surface, meritocracy makes perfect sense, right? Like it's almost, in all reality, according to social psychologists, it's almost a coping mechanism. Like we have to believe the system is just, we have to believe we will be rewarded for our work, or else why get up in the morning? Why not quit? Throw in all the towels. So I understand the system justification of meritocracy, but the reality is whenever you ask someone to define what meritocracy is, 9 times out of 10, and by 9 times, I mean 10 out of 10 in real life, but we'll just disclaimer, but you will hear them say the definition is work. Whoever put in the most amount of work, they're the ones that deserve it, right? But here's the thing, our definition of valuing work in real life and on a resume is not that. In real life and on a resume, it is what I call an incomes-based assessment, which is your labels and your logos. That's the universities that you had access to, the companies that were in your region or wherever that may be of your privilege and location. We know that there's historical context that has so much to do with that. So you have to take that into consideration. And then it's your network. It's who you know. And so we know that whenever, Aunt Becky can get anyone into Stanford off of a water polo scholarship, that now it can't possibly be based on that data point because it's a skewed data point. And the other thing is the undervaluation of what actual work is. So if we do see a kid that graduated from Harvard and went to Meta, we favor that over someone who had to go to community college, had to pick up their sister from school in between shifts, then go work at night, then go to bed, then wake up again and do it all over. And so to me, immediately whenever I hear meritocracy, my ears perk up, because then that means if it's the valuation of work, then you should have only bilingual people working for you because they had to learn 2 languages. So right off the bat, like, let me see. If it's really based on work, then I would love to see a lot of people who did do, community college and commuter colleges. That is a sign of a tie to social economic status. And if we believe America is rigged, which I do, then we know that specific group and those ties will give us individuals from marginalized communities that are still experiencing modern day disparity. I could go on 5 ever. I'm going to stop because I get nervous after I've talked for too long. But essentially, meritocracy, hot term. Please understand the fallacy lies in the definition, and the data point is not what we think it is. So when you hear it and you're hopped up and you're like, yeah, that's right, it isn't. And that's the end of that. Rachel?
Can I
Rachel,
add something to that really quick?
Yeah.
Actually, I just, for the audience to hear, because and Dr. Coverson will be able to echo this, I believe, because we both sat in top HR jobs. And when the talent, actually, Dr. J, you probably could too, you probably are a part of this whole discussion, when the bell curving, when the forced distribution is happening in order to determine meritocracy and what salary increases are given and what bonuses are given, the people who are in the bottom 10%, which in my career were always the brown and black people, what's not taken into consideration, I'm going back to the comment about the middle management and the bullies that are there managing those departments and keeping people down intentionally and not giving them an opportunity to be able to play in the full game of what goes on in departments. That is a fact as far as I'm concerned. Dr. J, you're nodding yes. Did you have something you wanted to say about that?
I did. I was just thinking about when I was in pursuit of the certified diversity professional and then the certified diversity executive credential, that the term meritocracy showed up as this. When defining the word white privilege, which was a phrase that was used back in the day, they defined that as unearned benefit, often confused with meritocracy. That's what I was thinking about.
Unearned benefit. Yeah.
And I want to add to the meritocracy conversation because I think we should be clear about who the idea of meritocracy invigorates to get out of bed, right? Because it's not me, right? Because if I truly believed that all of the missed opportunities, and they were probably blessings in disguise, but all of the missed opportunities for positions, contracts, whatever, that were awarded to people that don't look like me and have less credentialing than I do, meritocracy would cause me actually not to get out of bed, right? So I think it's important to be clear around, the coded language around the idea of meritocracy. The other thing that I will add is during the .com bust, there was a lot of conversation around significant mental health impacts to white men in particular, and even, some deaths by suicide, right? Because you're used to having all of these things and being able to play fast and loose. And then all of the sudden, you lost everything, right? And you've been able to sort of live a life up until this time that even with your most egregious shenanigans, you're very rarely held accountable. And so when the chickens came home to roost, right, there was a lack of ability to be resilient and bounce back and be like, oh, well, this is kind of how this thing happens. And that is how people of the global majority have to navigate spaces, because we know, despite all of the extra credentialing that we have to have to get an entry-level position, we know that this system is not based on a meritocracy.
And I think the other important thing to remember, thank you so much, Erin and Ashley and Rachel, for bringing up this offense, really, intel for what the other side is saying. This is very important for two reasons that I can think of. Number one, you just touched on, Stefani. If we remember, during the days of affirmative action, hire the qualified person. Well, who's anybody talking about not hiring anybody qualified? We're talking about correcting past injustices. And this is particularly important in this century, as HR or talent acquisition is now moving toward using lived experience as qualifications. And while there is benefit to that, it is also sometimes used as another way to move the goalpost. We were told we had to get a degree, so Black people still didn't get hired. We had to go do this, had to do that. We did that, still couldn't get hired. And now in the day where it's lived experience, and I don't even know how you measure that, but I'm not having a debate about that. Again, meritocracy in this realm, I see an attempt to try to just stop all the work to make sure that everyone has a fair shot to thrive and to reach their potential, no matter what social group they belong to.
So I will say that we saw, 2020, a big spike in DEI work and the companies that I was a part of, and just, it got a lot of attention. And along with that, we had a boom in hiring. And so I think we saw some positive changes within organizations over that period of time, where we were starting to look at things more around what are competencies versus what school did you go to and how many years of experience that you have as a software engineer. Unfortunately, I do feel like things are slipping. We've seen, especially in the tech space, we've seen so many layoffs, and now companies have to work a little less hard to attract talent, and they can be very, very specific about what experience they want in a candidate. And I think we're seeing a shift back to what's on the resume specifically. What are the companies you were a part of? What degree do you have? How many years of experience? And we know that negatively impacts certain demographics. So we don't have as much volume of talent, for example, Black software engineers. So I'm very concerned about what I'm seeing as a trend and kind of taking a step back in what companies are investing in DE&I.
What else?
I wanted to, can I bring up, I know that we have several educators watching because they've had messages. So I see you, Manuel and Wakisha, I see you out there, and Sherry. I wanted to bring up something related to things that I've heard already in the education space, because it's really similar. Middle level management for us is like assistant principal, and that's who I got to address today in a school district wide training. I remember when George Floyd was murdered, and I happened to be from Minneapolis originally, so I paid a lot of attention to that. I got more calls that next week from school districts and government agencies. Oh, we got to hire more Black people. We got to get more Black administrators. We got to get more Black teachers in our building. And I said, whoa, stop. I actually don't want to encourage my friends to join your company or go to your school until you've done some work to make sure that your culture is one that people would want to stay in. Because we don't just want the Black and brown faces in spaces if they're not getting supported. So I see you out there, educator, who's in that space right now. It's so hard to be the one and the only, and to constantly have to answer questions about your hair and your food and all the little things that may seem like they're not important, but they're constant reminders that you are not like everybody else around you. And so for anyone watching who's in that middle level management position, you have to first do your own work. You have to be willing to do your own work. And I think it's irresponsible actually to go out and try to hire a bunch of Black and brown people just to have the numbers. I think that's irresponsible if you're not willing to do your own personal work and then figure out how are you going to support those people well once they get to you, because they are not going to stay. And here's what we got to experience, the three ladies and I got to experience. Well, it doesn't work. DEI doesn't work. Well, that's because you're just doing the diversity part of it.
Right.
You haven't done the inclusion part of it. You haven't done the belonging part of it. Yeah, of course, if you just bring a bunch of like trans people or queer people, but you haven't done your work to address what might they need in terms of bathrooms and other, like, we got to stop that. We can't just do one of the pieces of DEI. We have to be willing to do the whole thing. Or it's so easy to just say the whole thing doesn't work, but we've only done one piece of it, and we haven't even done that one piece very well.
And Erin, I'll say in most of the companies I've been a part of, the one organization that had goals around DE&I was recruiting. So again, you see all this focus on bringing the diverse talent in, but then how are you going to support it?
And if I could say, sorry to add on, but you're exactly right. Access without support is not opportunity, and people trying to sell that gaslight are not doing anyone any favors. And I think that since this is a Christian channel, I'll have a Jesus one for you here. So there's something in the Bible where Jesus talks about like he's going away to prepare and make a way for you, right? And that's honestly how I always think about equity and inclusion. Like the D in diversity is the very last part. Like I don't even want to talk about that until we've already analyzed your benefits. We've looked at your structures, making sure it's inclusive for any abilities, like things, anything, right? But yes, so just always keep in mind, if you are the decision maker, you are the vessel that can kind of say, hey, we need some standards. Like we need, and put it on the company. They have the money, they have the resources. I don't know. I'm going to still say, put it on the school. Erin might correct me there. But the point is we are just individuals. And sometimes we cut corners for the sake of business because we want to be good employees, but we're hurting a whole realm of individuals because as recruiters, just like Rachel said, we're incentivized to save as much money as we can in negotiation. That salary negotiation is what creates salary secrecy because of inequities. Like who wants to talk about that? If it was all balanced, we'd be advertising it out the wazoo, right? So now we know we're all paid unequal and meritocracy is a myth. What else can we talk about, ladies?
Talk more about, because you said one of the issues that came up was about meritocracy. Were there any experiences that you, the three of you had either as individuals where you were personally, how you were treated while you were back there?
I don't even, oh my gosh.
You know, one of my questions I wanted to make sure I asked is, and I don't know if it's an appropriate question that you can answer, but when the stars or the networks reach out to guests to come on, do they pay the guests for their time to come on for their expertise? And also, are they also are they perpetuating the problem that they want to talk about? Like, can you talk more about?
I honestly feel like they wanted us to be caricatures. I really do. Like I was this stuffy, clueless white HR lady. Let's be honest. I'm really embarrassed about how I might come across in that. I feel like it was very set up, and I'm very interested to see how they edit the program. But what I feel when I'm disappointed is I really hoped, and I think it was very naive, that it was going to be a dialogue and actually a continuing learning opportunity for all of us. Instead, it was very divisive. Like it was set up so, oh, my dog. I don't know if you can hear my dog. She's joining in on the conversation. But yeah, I think it was set up to be divisive and not to be a learning opportunity. Or, you know, for me, again, I mentioned I'm not an expert. I'm still on my journey, as maybe we all are. And I was hoping that it would be a learning experience for me. And it was, but not necessarily in the right ways.
And to that end, this is why I wanted to talk big picture too, because I think it has been set up that DEI is the divisive thing. And I would offer that it's the opposite of that. It's not the DEI folks doing the DEI work that are causing the division. It's the other way. The folks that don't want to have these conversations are creating division. Now, are there DEI people that cause division? There are. Just like there are bad teachers. I love public education. I've been working in public education or around it for 33 years. I love it. And there are not good superintendents and not good principals and not good classroom teachers. Same with DEI. There are people doing DEI work that probably should not be doing DEI work, right? And doing it in a harmful way that creates harm and division. For the most part, though, that's not what I'm seeing. When I look at the people on the screen today, we are people that want to draw people in. We want to put out the truth and heal. We want healing. We're tired. We want healing. We want to be able to walk out and be whole people, and that's why we do this work. And so this dynamic that was created, not just by that show, but I see so many that are creating this dynamic. Even my church doesn't exist today, partly because I was called the divider of my church when I wanted to, in our very diverse church, I wanted to have conversations about race because I was watching, we're sitting next together in the house of God, praying for one another, but we don't know each other. We don't actually know each other's stories. And when George Floyd was murdered, I watched online as white people responded one way and Black people responded another. And I said, man, if we're really going to do this being in community together, we actually need to be able to talk. And for that, I was called the divider. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I am so far from a divider. Mm-hmm. But that's the dynamic I saw, Rachel, especially towards you. I saw that and how you were treated for sure.
Wow. And then there's this whole issue, which we won't have time. You can comment on it if you want. We are going to have to do some separate shows. You heard me make reference to it in my intro comments, and you heard me, I heard you make a comment about it, about two of the men that were there were Black men. And so, you know, I'm just going to throw out and say, you know, Black community, like part of the reason why, you know, the four of us Black women doing this together from a place of missionary and from a place of love and trying to heal is we also have to get at healing within the Black community. We have to get to a place where our Black brothers and sisters are not taking us down too, right? So you have this, that is a documentary, right? Like you can't get into it in 1 hour conversation, but you commented that there were a couple of folks there that, did they sabotage you, or was there something?
Well,
that was
they tried to, but in the end, ladies, do you remember at one point, one of the Black men had to say on camera, I think Erin's doing this work the right way. Mm-hmm. So the goal was for us to be antagonistic towards one another, like us against them. But that's not what ended up happening, and which is why I don't know that the show will air, to be honest. But I have seen this before. Like I can't tell you the numbers of people during the presidential cycle last time from my church and others who sent the Candace Owens videos. Like every week I'd get a new Candace Owens video. And one of the things I said that I say often is we are not a monolith. So Black folks are not a monolith. And look who stands to benefit. There's money. Like Candace Owens is making a ton of money being the caricature. So I'm going to use Rachel's term. Candace Owens is a caricature. I don't think she believes for a second some of the things that she's saying. I think she may say them enough at this point that she might believe some of it, but I don't believe she got into this because she believes it. I think she got into this because it gives her power, status, and money. And I think all too often, Black folks will turn on other Black folks for money and power and resources and access. And I think that's what I would call my Black brothers and sisters. We don't have to agree with each other, but we do have to humanize one another. And so this is the thing that I would say about the two men on the show. I worked really hard to stay curious with them. I worked really hard to also speak kindly to them, which I hope I did, ladies. I worked really hard to be that with them because I understand that they have something to gain and we all had something to lose if I were to be the antagonist. In front of 300 white people, we all had something to lose. And I chose to not be that person. I was not going to be the divider in front of an audience of 300 white people. It was not going to happen. And I think that's tough.
You were amazing, Erin. Like
you really were. She handled it like he was like, pow, pow, pow. And she was like, drive on by with that. Like, I ain't looking, I ain't messing with it. No, you did excellent. I was definitely the one out of pocket, and I'd do it again.
But I think in this conversation, though, Ashley, that's what's needed, right? So if Erin were to be out of pocket, right, that would be a whole nother set of circumstances. But I think that is what's important, and I hope to see more of in this work is people using their power and privilege to lean into conversations and situations that they know that they will not be eviscerated because they do have the protection of whiteness or, heterosexualness or whatever the dominant characteristics are in that conversation. And of course, there's nuance to that, right, with intersectionality. But I think, and it's my hope, that we will see and continue to experience more collectives like this one, and where people have come to the place where let's burn it all down, right? Because, there's a whole body of work that I think talks about some ineffectiveness of DEI from folks who have those dominant identities. And I'm going to call it out and specifically say whiteness, right? There's this tension, like, oh, I'm going to lose some of my power and privilege. I'm going to be inconvenienced. Like, I'm not going to, like, this card is going to get revoked. And so there's this tension. And so the more people that we get in this struggle that are willing to burn it all down, I think that is where the change is really going to happen, because otherwise we're just going to kind of continue to play at this when we look at organizations and who's really in charge of embedding these strategies and actually holding people accountable to rolling into these strategies and initiatives. So I appreciate that. I can't wait to see it.
Let me just make a little comment about that, because I really loved that, those comments, Stefani, what you're saying. I'm going to ask Rachel and Ashley, let me state first that for Black people, when we speak out, you heard my intro comments with, Fani Willis. I mean, there's just a whole list just in 2024 we could talk about. But when we speak out, we know that there are consequences when we do that. And what we know when we say boo, that we risk losing our jobs. We all know, because we've all lost jobs because we have spoken out for truth. And so what Stefani was just kind of pushing back on is, and I'm going to ask Rachel and Ashley, what are you willing to sacrifice in order to help progress this, in order to move this forward? Because if you're not prepared, to die for it, or you're not prepared to lose your job and have to be unemployed and be blackballed by other HR people in the community who say, Ashley, yeah, she's got all this, but let me whisper to you what she's really like. Because those gatekeepers are what is doing it behind the scenes to brown and Black people. What are you both personally willing to sacrifice in order? I mean, I can make that rhetorical, or you can try to answer it, but I'm saying that mostly for audience, because if we have, we have a white audience. Our audience is not predominantly Black from the numbers that I look at. What are you personally willing to give up? Because you will not make progress without knowing it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you. Do either of you want to respond?
Yeah, I do. I think being able to lean into this, you have to be really vulnerable, and you have to know that you are going to make mistakes, and sometimes very public mistakes. And I've done 2 of those. One at a company where I really messed up, good intentions pave the road to hell, they say. And I think that's happened to me at that company. And I think it may have happened to me on this particular program. And so what am I willing to risk? I'm not even, I just work for myself at this point, but my ego, I think is I think that I risked looking like a fool, and I knew that that was a possibility. And I knew that it could be personally damaged to my personal brand. And that might come to fruition. That might be what happens as a result of my going out there and talking about what naively maybe, but talking about what I believed in and what I thought was important. So I think I was asked this question by an influencer, and I really can't remember her name. I wish I could. She's on TikTok, and she was like, would you hire somebody above you? Would you hire a Black woman above you who's going to make more money than you, who's going to have more power and influence than you? And I can honestly say, absolutely. I absolutely believe in that. And I don't know if that's a sacrifice I don't feel like that's a sacrifice, because I feel like that's my job. So I think the biggest thing that I can share is that I am willing to be humbled and have my ego bruised and my brand damaged. Ashley,
those were all good answers. Yeah. I would say, for me personally, this work has become a life mission for me. I had to go through so much unlearning at a young-ish age, to where I eat, sleep, and breathe this. Like, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, with everything that's happening in the world right now, I'm focused on things overseas, but it's something to where, for me, it's till it draws blood. Once it affects my baby or my husband or my family, then we'll talk. But until then, I have only ever gained from working in social equity. And what I mean by that is, similar to how they said earlier, fellow Christian, went to private school, was a Becca book kid. I thought I was sprinting for the good Lord by telling people they were trans that they need to get in their own bathroom. Like, I thought I was doing great work. And I was a great social sprinter. I've always been very quick, gift of gab. But I was running in the wrong direction. And to me, the work of social equity is such a realignment with humanity that I couldn't thank it enough. I owe it my life's work, because, again, like I say, till it draws blood, so many white woman tears have caused a lot of blood. If I could undo 1, 2, 3, I don't know. I just think it's worth it. And I think that we're all in this waiting room, and what the hell else do we have to do, till we meet our maker? So let's fix some stuff. And Cindi, I love hearing about everything with Black prosperity, because that's our whole goal, is to change the wealth gap, and do it not through politicians, but through people like Rachel, through people who have really, really good intent, but don't necessarily know all the historical context for, how employment started in the US, and why do we have these certain structures, and why does the HRIS system look exactly like a slave sheet, exactly by line? So a whole bunch of different weird things where it's like, wow, we should really look into these origin stories here. So I say all this to say I'm very thankful to be here. I'm very thankful to have met Erin, Rachel, and now all of you lovely ladies. And for me, this is breathing at this point. I don't think there's any turning back for me.
Thank you for that, Ashley and Rachel. I want to make one comment, and then I know Erin's got one more thing, and we know we're running slightly over. It's okay. It's my show. I wanted to comment about something that you said, Rachel, that I just want to highlight for viewers, because you gave examples of promoting a Black woman over you. Let me just comment, the fear of a Black woman in power, to those who are working, particularly in nonprofits, where there's this whole shared leadership model now where there's co-leadership. I have perceived a lot of that to be because white women can't let go of power. And many of us, I think, many Black women particularly, have had to deal with the fact that we're not often seen as leaders. We are seen as their servants and to help make them look better. So I appreciate that you made the comment about Black women in leadership. Erin, I'll let you, I know you had something else you wanted to get at.
I just wanted to share one last analogy, and I didn't get to share this in the program, but I shared it today with principals and other district administrators. I think for a lot of, especially white men, but also white women, this work feels like a threat to them because we live in the scarcity mentality in this country. So we think, if you are going to take one piece of the pie, that means it's a piece away from my people, instead of there's enough pie for everybody to thrive. And so here's an analogy that I've been using with folks, at least in education, but if it works for you in your industry, I think about my dad, who's a 79-year-old white guy. And because I'm his daughter, he's had to do learning. And my mother's much more further along in her learning process, but he's a 79-year-old white guy from northern Minnesota. So learning about this stuff and talking about it is super uncomfortable for him because he just was taught to not talk about this stuff. Mm-hmm. But now that I'm his daughter, he's got to. Mm-hmm. And so he's been learning. But I give this analogy to my dad. For so long, the spotlight was on you, Dad. The spotlight was on you and your dad and your dad's dad, and everything about the way we talked about history and the way we hired people was all about you. And so the world was focused on you. All I'm not asking to kick you off the stage right now. I'm actually just asking that we pull the spotlight back so that we can see all the people on the stage. Mm-hmm. And so it's not about pushing you off the stage. It's about saying, can we pull the spotlight back so that now everyone is illuminated on the stage and everyone can be seen, and we can see the gifts and talents of all the people on the stage. And so I think there are far too many white folks that see this work as you're trying to silence me. No, we're trying to elevate and illuminate everyone. Mm-hmm. Because what we know in research plays this out. Education, I can tell you in schools, it plays this out. When we have more diverse perspectives and experiences at the table, we make better decisions for more people. But it requires that we see all of those voices on the stage as important and valuable. Yes. And back to the whole meritocracy thing, guess what? If you don't have a good stage hand, you don't have that play. Mm-hmm. But we talk about meritocracy as if only the lead singer is important and has done the work, when actually the play would not go on if you didn't have the person cleaning the stage and getting the stage set up and building the props and all of that. And so I think we need to even reframe, like, what is important work and who gets to be seen as important.
Right. Very powerful, Erin. Thank you. I'm going to, before I close out the show, let me just ask for a 60-second final thoughts on the show tonight. And maybe in your 30 seconds of that, what would you like to see as a next step to help keep the DEI movement alive? I'm going to start with our guests. Ashley, 60 seconds.
Well, I'll be honest, I'm not scared about the movement going anywhere, because if I'm sure of anything in America, it is that inequalities will rise again, people will be killed again, and we will have another uprising again. This time around, whenever we see that data.
Uh-oh. We lost her for a moment. Rachel, go ahead.
Okay. I kind of lost what the question was.
Just, final thoughts or what you like to see. Yeah.
For me, again, I bring you the corporate perspective, and I think that I think when you hear DEI is not working, my first thought is then we need to try something else. You don't just give it out and, throw it all away because it's not working. Personally, I don't actually even agree with the fact that DEI is not working. I have seen it work in organizations. I know that employees care about diversity. Candidates care about diversity. So companies may have the upper hand today, but they won't always. And it's going to be really important in order for companies to be successful and to thrive, to take a look at what they're doing and to build infrastructures that support DE&I.
Thank you for that, Rachel. And thank you and Ashley for being on with us tonight. Dr. Coverson, do you have a closing comment you would like to make?
So, studying this organizational change and leadership and reading, a whole bunch of theory and practice on organizational change and various leadership philosophies. And it's fascinating that the lion's share of them include equitable frameworks, like getting input, thoughts, and feedback from folks that are at the margins, just as one example. So that's adaptive leadership. And so this is really, from my perspective, about race, racism, and anti-Blackness at the root of it, because Blackness and race lives in all other identities. And I think companies are going to mess around and find out. And so why I say that is by 2030, and I posted this on LinkedIn today, Gen Z is expected to be 30% of the workforce. And they deeply value this work, and not just on race and gender, but just the wide variety. And so how can you be in business, right, and turn your back on 30% of the workforce by those estimates? So I think there's going to be some companies that are going to mess around and find out. I also know that there are companies that are kind of secretly, in the back conference room, still trying to figure out how to be more equitable and inclusive. So it's not going away. I think DEI is going into another iteration. And, while history doesn't repeat itself, it often does rhyme. So this is not the first time, and it's not going to be the last time.
Thank you for that. Dr. J.
Words matter. Mm-hmm. And words matter. And we ran a pro-equity, anti-racism strategy as opposed to DEI. But in preparation for the next show, I think it would behoove all of us to think about, when we hear DEI isn't working, what does that mean to us, and what are we even going to say about it? Mm-hmm. Because if you think about it this way, slavery was not established because they didn't like Karen Johnson as a Black woman. It was dehumanizing a group of Black people. The Holocaust did not occur because somebody didn't like a Jewish person. The whole population was dehumanized. And based on what I'm hearing from Erin, Rachel, and Ashley tonight, it was another attempt to make DEI a thing, when actually, individually, those words mean something in terms of organizational practice. I would also suggest, in preparation for the continuation of this conversation, to go and see Ava DuVernay's film entitled Origin, just to be reminded again of what it is we're truly dealing with here when we're talking about it. We talked earlier about, Erin said, I don't want you to hire a whole lot of Black and brown people who are not going to be received or feel like they belong. We're talking about culture. And I think we need to remember culture, the values, the beliefs, the expectations is what we're dealing with, which gave rise to my opening of reading the definition of misogynoir. And until we think about what is and how we are going to move forward, and what do we need to see, and what are we going to do, we're going to be on this journey.
Thank you, Dr. J. Erin, did you have a closing thought you wanted to make?
I want to make a closing thought to my Christian brothers and sisters again, because when I look at who's coming for this, it's people who identify as Christian people. And I think that breaks my heart so much, because we are called to love. We're called to love even those who are different from us. And this, maybe race in the context that we're talking about it now, didn't exist then. Gender, identity, and sexuality didn't exist in the way that it was talked about in the Bible, but this is still a dynamic of choosing to love people who are not like you. And so to my Christian brothers and sisters, I challenge you to push in, to lean into this conversation, because Jesus didn't go to the people that were like him. He went out of his way to go and love and make space for people who are not like him, for people who are being pushed in the margins. And for me, that's why I do this work, is how do we create space for everyone? We're all made in God's image, and he made us brown, and he made us white, and he made us pink, and he made us tan. He made us all different shades for a reason. We've got to learn to love that, but also understand the dynamics that have occurred at the hands of people who called themselves Christians. So it's not about shame, blame, and guilt, but it is about, we've got to acknowledge the truth of our history and be willing to face it and lean in. So I encourage my sisters and brothers to lean in, push into this conversation.
If I could just, the woman at the well was a Samaritan. She was a different ethnic group other than Jewish. Furthermore, in the Jewish culture, men had nothing to do with women. So when Christ went to talk to the woman at the well, even his disciples, his peeps, his homies, if you will, were like, what? What on earth are you doing talking to a woman first and a Samaritan who was a different people group second? There you go, Erin. I just had to just go ahead and give the story.
Thank you all. Let me just thank Ashley and Rachel for being our guests and coming on with us this evening. We really appreciate that you came on and had this dialogue with us. And to my sisters who are here every week with me, thank you all so much for being here every week. What I want to say to our audience is I wanted to thank you for being here with us every week. I appreciate, I see some good numbers showing up tonight as we're on air, and it's my first time back after a few months. This conversation is so important, and we keep it alive every week. Our lives depend on this. I want to thank, I've gotten several text messages while I've been live with people thanking me for these powerful conversations that need to be had. And so we do need to do this every week and keep moving this forward. We're in an election year. Things are going to get ickier as they get ickier. And so thank you all for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at our new time at 8 p.m. So have a good week, everyone.
Half that up in sacks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yo.